from lunch. So I'm very pleased to announce our second speaker of the day, Dr. Mona Diab. Dr. Diab is at Amazon and also a faculty member at George Washington University. And she's going to be talking about diversity in computational linguistics and NLP. So really looking forward to the talk. Let's welcome Dr. Diab.
Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me. It's such a pleasure. For those of you who don't know, I actually haven't been to a major ACL conference for the past 6 years for some reasons, but it's my first comeback. And what better way to start it off than to be here in this forum? Diversity. And today I'm actually going to do something quite different from what I typically do in these types of talks, where I typically do very technical talks, but now I'm going to do something that's very personal. I'm going to share with you some of my stories, some of my insights in the context of diversity in CL and NLP. So hopefully, with sharing some of these stories, you might get some intuition as to how to navigate some of these spaces. So this is, I need to. So why NLP to me? So the diversity is endemic to our community, I believe. And I feel like I'm a minority of the minority of the minority. That's why I'm really at the very, 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 very little spot in that middle of that big heart as a female Muslim woman, obviously. But I wanted to say something about YNLP in the sense of going beyond the notion of acknowledging, tolerating, and accepting diversity to embracing and actually celebrating it. I think that's a very important aspect. And to really celebrate this diversity that we have among us. And when I say diversity, I mean that in all forms: gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and research focus, etc. And yes, I do mean research focus. And I really have to digress at this point. So right now, the general view, as I said, I haven't been coming to a lot of conferences lately, but I'm still very active in the community in terms of publications, in terms of the research. And I've noticed that there's a lot of disdain if you're not working on some kind of neural net or deep learning model. If you're not doing BERT or ELMO, with all due respect to these models, if you're not doing that, you're not cool enough. And we all want to be loved, right? So what about data? What about resource building? What about applications, symbolic AI, or even honest to God, pure linguistics in all its glory? I believe they all contribute to our science, the science of CL and NLP. So my first insight, which I'm sharing with you, is don't let fads and trends dictate our attitudes toward one another. Really, that's part of our diversity, that we have different perspectives, different research foci. So today, what I want to share with you is my perspective. As a Muslim woman, that's my religion, my identity, as an African, Middle Eastern woman, and also as an Arab, Egyptian, American, cultural woman. So I'm multilingual, and I'm also multicultural. But first and foremost, I'm a woman in this field, in NLP, AI, and technology. So for me, YNLP is really about democratization of knowledge through language. And it really is a notion of empowering humans to gain global information access in all languages. That's why I think we're in a unique science, which is really different from other types of sciences that could be siloed out. We work on something that's really so inherent to our existence as human beings. And also, it's potentially a way for us to build bridges across cultures, recognizing what is shared, what makes us unique, and building cool technologies that may improve our lives, or just because I think, maybe, potentially. But most interesting to me, and what got me into this field in the first place, is maybe potentially understanding how the human mind works. And I think that's a fascinating question. I don't think it's ever going to happen in my lifetime, but at least, being on that journey could help. So, yeah. But the current picture more or less looks like this, in technology at least. And we want it to be like this, where we have all these shades of colors. And I'm focusing, as I said, on women, but that applies to all kinds of diversity. So what does it take? I think it takes grit, passion, and perseverance. It takes resilience, learning and bouncing back from our failures, acknowledging that we're all going to fail at some point in our lives, in our careers, but also bouncing back from that and trying to get the lessons learned. And I think very important to us in our field and in other fields in general, in science in general, in all kinds of fields, developing a sense of empathy for each other and collaboration with each other is something that I think is very crucial. Respect our differences. I think that's also very important. Support for each other, both women, men, non-binary categories, you name it, in all our diversities. But standing up for what is right. When you see something going wrong, stand up and say something about it. So who am I to share insights after all? I acknowledge I am privileged with a family that really supported me all the way through. And I do acknowledge that. And in fact, contrary to stereotypes, girls and women pursuing STEM careers and STEM education in the Arab and Muslim world make up to 37 to 54% of their student population. But what's interesting is that most of these people don't end up going into careers in this area. They end up being students. So when I first moved to the US, I was actually really surprised when people talked about underrepresentation for women. I was like, wait a second, every class I've been in the Arab world in Egypt was filled with women. We aced math, we aced science, but it was not the experience in the West. So this is just an example. But did I face adversity? Yes, I did. So let me tell you my story. I spoke very early on. This is not me. I think she's a cuter version of me. I was a very determined, stubborn little kid. You can ask my mother about it, especially when it came to my fashionista style. I always wanted to wear different colors, which she did not approve of. But essentially, growing up, I grew up actually partly in England and in Egypt, so I was naturally bilingual. But at the age of 10, I had a serious multilingual conundrum. Pasta, right? So I noticed while having lunch one day that we had pasta letters that were in the Latin alphabet. And I asked my parents, what's happening here? How come our trees don't grow pasta in Arabic script? And of course, this was their reaction. What the heck? Pasta growing on trees? Let's start there, you know. But that was the first reaction. But still at 10, really auspicious age it seems, I also discovered the power of language. And it was really through the religious upbringing that I had, where the Quran, which is really language-centric. So that got me fascinated about language in general, the meaning of words, the different levels of semantics, and so on. And I also developed a passion for reading. Fast forward 6 years, I wanted to double major in math and comparative literature in college. That was the reaction I got from my parents. It's like, what? You won't make a living, man. You know, let alone getting a good husband in our culture. So long story short, I ended up doing something kind of related, well, kind of, Egyptology and computer science. But I also minored in philosophy and psychology. And I didn't like it very much. All along I was complaining and saying, I want to do math, and my parents were like, no, you're doing applied math, that's good enough. You can be an engineer, when you graduate, you get a good husband, everything's going to be good. So, but I took a class in 1991 in AI, and that was like eureka. It's like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want to do. I love the human mind, I love things that have to do with intelligence. And actually my graduation project, which was really not really orthodox at the time, students don't go and propose graduation projects. In my case, because I double majored, I went to my professors and I was like, I want to do a graduation project where I looked at the combination of Egyptology with computer science. So I worked on an expert system for completion of missing parts from hieroglyphic texts. And this was my initial foray into NLP CL, and that was back in 1992, ages ago. Probably lots of people in the room were not even born yet, but let's not go there. So long story short, I came to pursue a PhD in computer science. I ended up doing computer vision, actually machine learning and reinforcement learning, and I hated it every single step of the way. I wanted to do language, but what I was told by my professors at the time, you speak English, don't you? That's good enough. You just work on language. And I said, I don't think that's going to cut it. So I ended up going to University of Maryland, and I ended up getting a PhD in computational linguistics in a linguistics department, which was kind of really unorthodox, again, for the next time. But again, here come my parents, and they're like, what? You're leaving a PhD in computer science, which is going to be very lucrative, to do a PhD in linguistics, And at the time, I was like, you know what, this is my passion, I'm going to go for that. So initial challenges. The first positive cultural clash was with my PhD advisor, Philip Resnick. I was his first PhD student. And we, in Arabic, we use the word inshallah a lot. Inshallah means God willing. And I remember him giving me our first assignment, and he goes, Mona, are you going to get this done? And I said, of course, inshallah. And he was like, what does that mean? I said, God willing. He's like, whoa, wait a second. Are you actually going to get this done? I said, yeah. But, you know, we just say that because who knows, maybe a tree will fall on my head. And he was like, no, that doesn't work here. But anyway, the positive outcome. So naturally, I mean, Philip is still in touch with me, obviously. And in our conversations, he uses inshallah, mashallah, all the Allah things, you know, and we're good to go. But I also had a negative cultural clash. Actually, it was upon an invitation to one of my colleagues in the lab, and actually there are several people here from the lab who know this exact story, where we had a celebration for Ramadan, and I went up to this colleague, friend, quote unquote, and I was like, come and join us. And then he looked at me with a straight face, and he goes like, you know, your very existence bothers me. And I thought he was joking, and I was like, you're kidding, right? And he's like, no, I'm not. And I literally backed out of the room, and I went to Nizar and I think Fazil and other people in the lab, and I was like, this is what happened. I was escorted by them for a long period of time, getting in and out of the lab. But this was a very strong encounter at the time. It was very impressionable. So again, being the person that I am, I took very unorthodox career choices. So after finishing my postdoc at Stanford, I decided not to accept several tenure track offers that I got, as well as industrial offers. And I accepted the sort of like, I can say, less aspired to type of career path. And I chose a soft money position at Columbia University with CCLS. And of course, this was the reaction I got again from my mentors and my advisors and my parents and everybody under the sun. They're like, what are you doing again? And at the time, I just had a vision. In my opinion, I had a vision. And this was the vision: building multilingual resources and technologies. From my perspective at the time, this was something that I felt was so needed, was so sorely needed. And to echo Emily in the morning, where this completely Anglo-centric view of the world of NLP is so, actually, unfortunately, is still so predominant. But in fact, it was even more than this at the time. I'm talking about 2005, 2006. So it was really very ingrained in people's minds that people work in English. And if you're, you know, kind of adventurous, you go into some other language, let's say Spanish or French. And to me, that was a very biased way of looking at things. So, and I don't know if people realize, the majority of the data out there is very Anglo-centric. Even when we look at, you know, like images of X-rays, cancer charts, all of these tend to be more Anglo-centric. So think about those who are digitally disenfranchised. How are they able to leverage the technologies that we're building? So looking at that from that perspective was something that I was very keen on. But also, again, moving away from the English-centric view of NLP with less bias. So potentially affording equitable access to knowledge and information to all peoples. And also at the time, the timing was actually a calculated risk. So I knew that Arabic was important, but also looking at Arabic and the Arabic challenge in itself from an NLP scientific perspective, to me it symbolized the microcosm of the NLP challenges that we could face in the multiple scenarios that we face in the world, in our world. So really it covers the spectrum from low resource scenarios to complex linguistic modeling in this one language family, but it could be transferred over to other scenarios as well. But the icing on the cake actually was that I found a team that I loved, and one of them is right here, Nizar and Owen, whom I worked with very closely for 8 years at least, and it was exactly the right combination. So one of my research foci, as I mentioned, was this multilinguality and cross-lingual transfer. And I'm going to delve a little bit into, just to give you some snippets of what I've been working on for a long period of time with my students and with collaborators. So we all agree that data is very important, but almost 90% of this data is unstructured, as we know. And we need to make sense of that, right? So we want to convert it into valuable information. So right now, we're living in a very, very special time where we have the alignment of the stars in a sense. You have the algorithms together with the ML in particular, but also because of the hardware that we have a very golden opportunity, I think. But unfortunately, in this world of unstructured data, we have many domains, genre, languages, dialects, as you all know, and many languages in the world have very little resources in terms of digitized resources. So we have this ubiquity of low resource scenarios. And ideally, we would like this world of globalized communications to have universal solutions with local flavors. So we have a need for processing all languages. Applications need them, and we need to cater to our online customers as well in their native tongue, while affording them access to available information in other languages. So one approach is to devise solutions for each and every language, which begs the question, what is a language? So we have constraints by dialect, register, genre, style, domain. We need lots of annotated data per language and variants. Too many varieties, too expensive as an approach. So what are alternative approaches that we've looked at in the context of my own research? We've looked at generalized solutions, which tend to be more or less agnostic, looking at character models. We've also looked at Robin Hood type models, where we try to leverage, and I use leverage in a generous sense, not steal, but leverage, the rich to help the poor. So we exploit aligned by multilingual resources, such as parallel corpora, dictionaries, knowledge bases, and so on. Exploit linguistic affinities, such as language families and varieties. When you're informed, when you know something about the languages, then you're able to exploit them in the right way. And also looking at unrelated bi- and multilingual resources, such as comparable corpora and so on. So we've looked at this in the context of language identification. And this is a predominantly big problem in languages like Arabic, where we do a lot of what's called code switching, where people switch between different varieties of the language in the same utterance. And we've also looked at this in the context of sentence identification. We've also looked at aligned bilingual resources, such as parallel corpora and dictionaries and knowledge bases. So we looked at the problem of word census ambiguation, semantic role labeling, automatic resource creation, cross-lingual sentence mapping. So I'm going to put all these slides up for people, and then you could take this down. We've also looked at exploiting linguistic affinities. This comes from the insights that we know from linguistics as to what languages are close to each other and how could we exploit them in the right way. So languages could be close to each other lexically, they could be close to each other morphologically, syntactically, even pragmatically. So looking at these different signals from different languages is something that we've looked at. So for example, discovering and leveraging cognates for improving machine translation is something we've looked at in my lab. We've also looked at transfer learning for emotion and sentiment, leveraging clustering and cross-lingual embeddings, but pivoting on closely related languages as opposed to English. So instead of adopting the English-centric view of the world, we actually adopted a different view of the world, where we're looking at Uyghur, for example, which is a language spoken in China. And we looked at leveraging Arabic, Turkish, Farsi, Russian, and Chinese, as opposed to English, French, and Spanish, which have a lot of resources. So how do we take our linguistic insights and apply them to these situations? We've also looked at automatic creation of resources for the dialects. And exploiting unrelated resources has also been something we've looked at, with the assumption that languages overall share a lot of common concepts, and this has been something that we've leveraged a lot in our work. And we do this both on the word level and the sentence level. So a lot of this research was supported by multiple government agencies and multiple companies, including Google Faculty Awards, but also it could not have happened without the collaboration with students and other collaborators, and I have them listed here. But what did I learn over the 20 years? The evidence suggests that there's some core semantic space that exists across languages, some kind of an interlingua, but with a modern twist maybe, but potentially could be discovered using hybridized methods. So we need to use data-driven, sophisticated models, but also look closely at explicit linguistic representations, what we call feature engineering or feature representation, and maybe we could lead us to get some more interpretable models that we could actually gain some insight into how the language faculty works. But what's crucial also that I've learned over the years is knowing our data. And I believe that this is such an important aspect of our work, which should not be shunned aside. And unfortunately now, a lot of people in our field tend to go like, we don't care about the data. Just give us lots of it and we'll be able to get something out of it. And I think that attitude should not be encouraged in our communities. And I believe in order for us to make sure that our science is solid, we need to be really paying attention to data, error analysis, and even success analysis, as actually Emily also iterated in the morning. So I had a lot of successes in my career. So despite establishing one of the strongest recognized reference points in Arabic, ACL, in the world actually, Qadim, it's called Qadim, also generating a lot of money and getting a lot of funding. I served as a Columbia University faculty senator. I also helped establish the STAR-SEM conference. Unfortunately, I was told things like this. If you're that good, how come you're not in a tenured position? And this came to me as a shock, that this is the perception of people in the field. And because I chose to take a career path that was not the typical treaded, go for a faculty position and you just work and you work your way through the tenure process and you're good to go. And even I got this in a job interview from the VP of Research, the Vice President of Research for a university. And I'm not going to name which university, but he basically told me, it was a he, and he said, you realize you made suboptimal career choices, so why should we hire you? And I was like, what? So that was my response. But also, my story to date, coming out as a Muslim female scientist has not been necessarily easy also. I was never really closeted, but now it's more visible because I wear it on my head, so people wearing their religion on their head stand out a little bit more. But I mean, in terms of motivation and timing, this was also critical. So especially now, being in the US, there's so much Islamophobia, and I felt like it's the right time to do this, where there's a lot of bad stereotypes running around. That was one aspect of the work, of the decision, but also serving as some kind of a positive example in this world where there's lots of negative examples. But I was attacked for my public political views, and actually by people from our own community. But what I've learned is that we have hundreds, if not thousands, of amazing people in our community who are extremely supportive, and people came out of the woodwork to support me at the time when this attack happened. It happened right after I wore the hijab, and there was a political thing going on in Egypt at the time. And unfortunately, it was not even by somebody who's a minority person, but at any rate. What I also learned is that we need to remain positive and adopt a growing mindset in such scenarios, and really avoid, a victim type of narrative, and that helps a lot. And sometimes we need to convince people that they actually do have power to change perceptions. They just need to assume responsibility, and I think that's a very critical thing. And finally, being assertive, proactive, and constructive as a community in trying to build mechanisms and establish mechanisms to stop and hold individuals accountable for their aggressive behavior. And it goes a long way, and it requires patience and perseverance. So we need to actually, as a community, especially in this type of forum, work toward those goals. I know we have a lot of excellent people working on this. I was involved in some of this at the beginning, and I think we need to continue, treading on in that direction. So in a nutshell, I think we need to adopt a growth mindset in general, and we really need to discard a victim mentality as people of minorities, regardless of whatever minority you belong to. So what is my take-home message? I think you need to pursue your dreams with grit, resilience, be empathetic, be yourself. No need to conform to a certain mold. And I mean, I think I'm okay in terms of success. And I think I shocked my parents so many times that they've given up already. But, but from their perspective, they think, yeah, you might have done some good stuff in your life, so it's not too bad. And I got married, which is a good thing. So, so that helped. So take calculated risks and avoid fad and trend attitude pitfalls. Always be respectful of others' passions and career choices. They probably have a reason. You just need to probe them and ask the questions if you're really curious. and recognize that we also share more than what meets the eye as humans. And I believe, really, really, really totally believe that success is only built when you collaborate and really foster teamwork. I think that's really how our science advances, how we advance as humans and as scientists. So remember, we're stronger because of our diversity, not in spite of it, and we're stronger together. And let's try to create a safe space for NLP to flourish. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Yeah, okay. Thank you for your talk, Mona. We have about 15 minutes for questions, if anyone has questions.
Hi, Mona. I'm just being
Hi,
a
Ada.
devil's advocate here. But do you think if, say, I mean, I'm also a minority woman myself, but I was just curious, do you think your life would have been easier as a minority woman to have taken a more conventional path? Would have helped you help other women, other minority women to succeed in theirs? Like for the next generation, say like if you had gotten a tenure track position, that maybe you would have been more, I don't know. I mean, you probably are now, but like I'm just saying earlier, that you have been more powerful to be able to enable more.
So I want to make sure I got the question right. So you're asking if it wouldn't it have been better if I took a more traditional career path?
Considering that,
that I'm a woman as a minority.
I hear that sometimes for myself. It's like that I am already different, and that and I've taken an unconventional path, and then I'm already thinking different. So don't you think that I'm making my life more difficult by making these choices?
Yeah, so for me, it was, I was a little bit selfish at the beginning, so it was more like, I'm interested in this. I was just really pursuing my passion. I wasn't thinking of the next generation per se. I was more thinking about, so for example, a lot of my career was spent, especially the early times, I spent a lot of time going to the Arab world because I knew they were not able to come to our conferences. I would go and give talks in their places and what have you. But really, I also, I did not mention this, but I benefited a lot from the trailblazers before me, like people like Kathy McCoo, Julia Hirschberg, people who were at Columbia, who were female professors, who were extremely supportive as mentors. And I benefited from that, from those examples. So in a sense, I felt like I was the second generation. I was the younger generation. So I was going in that untraditional route because I had these people who've already established the path, in a sense, from my perspective at the time. Would I have been more effective if I had taken the traditional route? I'm not sure. I mean, it's an interesting question, but yeah, as I said, I was a little bit selfish at the beginning. It was not like I was intending to be an anarchist, unorthodox person. I just felt like this is what my passion is and this is what I want to do. And there are lots of conversations I had with my mentors and with my supervisors about, but I don't love this. And they were like, what? And I said, but I want to do something I love. And that was sort of like the guiding factor along a lot of my career choices, in a sense.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a follow-up question kind of from both of your presentations about moving away from Anglo-centric research. It's really incredible the way you've been able to incorporate all sorts of languages into the research that you're doing. Do you have any advice for scholars or even people in industry who are trying to move towards using more languages, maybe languages they don't even speak, in their research?
If I couldn't hear the rest of your question. Do we have a lot of scholars?
Do you have advice for scholars or people in industry who are trying to move away from Anglo-centric systems and maybe don't have language backgrounds in other languages?
Okay. So from my perspective, so I work for Amazon right now, and there is, I mean, we try to cater to a global market. So we are very much interested in multiple languages, and we hire linguists and whom we call language engineers in all kinds of languages. And people still need to be educated on the difference between somebody who speaks a language versus is a language scholar. like a linguist. And we're doing this education, at least within the context of Amazon. So people don't have to be like native speakers of, Swahili in order for them to work on Swahili. So yeah. I don't know if Emily, you have something to add to this, but yeah, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Unlike most of you, I'm not in academia. I'm in industry, from what I can see. And I'm typically the only woman in the room, and I wonder if there's any way to have the conversation about diversity without having it be a forceful identity onto the others in the room.
So I couldn't get your question. I couldn't hear it.
So if you have any tips on how to have the conversation about diversity or the problem of lack of diversity in the industry without having it be a forceful conversation or
Without having it to be a forceful conversation?
yes, or an aggressive conversation.
Aggressive conversation. So in industry, you get even less diversity than, at least less visible diversity that I've noticed, at least within the context of Amazon. We have few women, in science positions, far less women. And the problem is trying to get people to apply and to encourage them to, pursue careers in industry. They're less prone to doing that than going to academia. Now, having the conversation on diversity, we do have initiatives. I believe all big companies have initiatives on diversity and trying to increase the pool and fund, for example, programs that would increase, diversity in STEM in general. Now, I'm not sure what else can we do, but in terms of the tone, I think that's what the tenor of your question, right? Was the tone, how can we do this without being aggressive about it? I think trying to make it for industry, you have to make the case that diversity is really enriching to the work environment and also to the product environment and to the whole atmosphere, the whole ambiance, and come up with compelling arguments in that regard. As opposed to being aggressive in terms of stomping our feet and going we are less represented and so on and so forth. So having that balance where you make a compelling argument that they could listen to, I think is key to that conversation. Yeah. But interesting question.
I have one more question from the internet.
Yeah, sure.
Libby couldn't join us today, but she messaged me and would like me to ask.
Who is that?
So Libby Barak,
Libby,
who helped
yes,
organize
yes,
last year.
yeah,
So she was asking that, speaking from your perspective as a person who had a very successful soft money position on basically not mainstream NLP, not deep learning for English, et cetera, et cetera. How do you approach grant applications? You're literally asking for money for things that people aren't working on and getting all these latest BERT paper or whatever scores. So was that a difficulty, or is it just something that you did based on your mindset? And do you have advice for how to do that for other people who also want to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think we lucked out. There's an alignment of the stars in a sense. So at the time, deep learning was not really a big fad. Deep learning only became a fad maybe in 2013, 2012. Maybe 2008 started the whole wave, but really became mainstream in 2012 or so. So before that, we did a lot of really cool feature engineering. But also, knowing your funders is, I think, a crucial thing. Knowing where, being able to get a read on their pulse of what they're interested in and trying to figure out how can you align your interests with the funder's interests, whether the funder is an NSF or a DARPA or an IARPA or even a company. So knowing where the pulse is, making a compelling story, do your research, do your homework. That was also a very important aspect of our research grant writing, is knowing your data really well, knowing exactly the space of your problem, knowing what is outside the scope of your problem, I think is a very important aspect as well. A lot of people write grants and they write, huge overarching problems that they want to solve, and people could read through that this is not achievable, this is not feasible. So the feasibility angle of writing a grant is extremely important in the sense of making an argument that whatever I'm proposing is something that is doable in the amount of time, given the amount of money. So having these factors all come together, coalescing together, is I think a very important aspect of research grant writing. Whether you're targeting, as I said, a company or an agency, was something that we were very attuned to, so to speak. And also looking at previous examples of what worked for this agency or what worked for this company was also very helpful. And of course, getting advice from people who have gone through the experience was also something very helpful. So this is one of the aspects of the success that we had at Columbia, was really we were part of a big group of NLP researchers in general who had tons of experience, and we used them in so many different ways. And I'm not discarding the other mentors that I had as well. I mean, Bonnie Dorr and Dan Jarafsky and Chris Manning and Philip Resnick and all these people that I worked with in different phases of my life were fantastic mentors. So, I mean, as I said, I lucked out. Yeah. So.
Hi, Mona. Thank you for the talk. Wonderful talk. I'm Tamar Solorio from University of Houston. My question is about, is there something that you wish you knew when you started your research group that you learned through these years? Because you have a big group. You always amaze me about how much you do, how big your group is. So is there something you can advise to people that are starting the research groups and something you learned that you wish you knew when you started?
Yeah. So, yes, I'm notorious for doing that, having lots of people working with me, but I'm also blessed that way. So it's a good thing. It's a blessing and a little bit of I don't want to say a curse, but it just adds a lot of hours to my working day. so that's the downfall of that. But in terms of advice, I think being patient is a very important aspect of building a research group. I think being patient and accepting that people, especially students, are going to come from different backgrounds. I mean, you can be selective, you can be as selective as possible. And at the onset, especially when I joined GW being on the faculty, I thought that the students are going to be of a certain background in terms of their preparation. And some of them came less prepared than what I expected compared to previous students that I had. So that to me was like, oh, wait a second, that's not what I signed up for. That's the beginning, that's the first reaction. But then I realized, what is my mission? Again, my mission is, as an educator, was to be patient and learn how to bring people up to speed, and different people come at different paces. So having that, reminding ourselves that we need to be patient, and especially given that I was, when I was in the soft money position, I was also doing a lot of hands-on work. So I was extremely involved. I mean, I actually wrote programs myself. I did coding until 2016, like literally writing everything myself. So I tended to be a little bit of a micromanager. Like my students would come to me with their code and with their results, and I'm like, wait a second, show me the code. And it's like, no, you don't do that anymore, So learning to delegate and learning how to, give them the confidence to be independent is very important. So again, appealing to your better self of being patient and realizing that people come with different types of backgrounds. And my advice is not to take on too many students if you're starting off as a new faculty member. Yeah, I started off with 8, which is kind of like, what? That was my first, so that was kind of my first cohort, was 8 students, which was kind of a lot. Especially that you have to teach and you have to write grants and pursue your research goals and whatever. But I would start with a smaller number, and also invest in postdocs. I think they're a fantastic asset. So so it's a kind of like a vicious cycle, right? So money engenders positions, and positions engender, So anyway, but so this is another aspect,
Hi, thanks a lot for your talk. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm Angeliki Lazaridou and I work at DeepMind. And So I want to ask a question regarding this tense between deep learning and computational linguistics. Personally,
Between what?
the tense.
Clients?
Well, the clash, the
Tension.
sorry,
The tension.
Thank you.
Tension.
Between deep learning and computational linguistics. Myself, I have like a background in computational linguistics. It seemed to me that the part of the big success of deep learning was the fact that it got democratized in the sense that it's really easy now. People have invested in toolkits and tutorials and courses, and really in every corner of the internet there is something about deep learning, some model, some data to try and start hacking something. And I'm wondering whether you think that something like this could happen with computational linguistics to make it more easy maybe for people to see the beauty and necessity of language when developing this type of architectures, or whether you think there is some other way to bring more machine learning people into thinking more about CL problems in the CL way.
Yeah, so I think this is a nice question. I think it's really interesting because, of course, I'm also one of those people on that treadmill that, that Emily mentioned in the morning. Like, naturally, if you want to publish, you need to be on that, try to get state of the art and do this, you need to adopt all kinds of models that are fancy models and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I think we're going to plateau. A lot of these models are plateauing. And also the level of interpretability of the models. People are, as scientists, whether you're a machine learning scientist or you're a CL scientist, I think we all have this burning curiosity within us at some level where we want to know why something works the way it works. And I think without CL and without looking into the data and looking into why something is working and why something is not, we won't get that answer to that question. And my belief is that this is a compelling story or a compelling conversation to have with people from the other side who don't care. Give me data that's vision data, give me data that's, gesture data or whatever. I think a lot of people have that same curiosity about why something works the way it does. And I think this would be the way. From one angle, the numbers are going to plateau because you can only go so high for certain systems. And the other question is why something works the way it does. So I think these two angles are worth having conversations about. Yeah, so.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm Marie Blaweshik, and I'd like to ask you about your work in Amazon. So how did you come to work in Amazon, and how advanced is the technology there compared to what's happening in academia? Because I was having a discussion with a computational linguistic, and I said, okay, Google does this and this. He said, you can't compare yourself with Google. So, are there like closed technologies that, are being developed that we still in academia are still a bit behind in some way?
So was the question why I went to Amazon at the beginning, the first part of the question?
Yes, how did you...
how did I end up going there?
Yeah, and how do you find it?
Oh, how do I find it? I like it a lot. No, actually, I do like working for industry. It's interesting. It was my first foray into industry, in fact. I never worked for industry before 2017. And the reason I went at the time was out of curiosity. So I had just been promoted to full professor, and I was like, you know what? I'm itching for something more, like a bigger challenge. And the opportunity presented itself. And it was like, I believe that at companies now, we're living a different era where they're doing science at scale, which is something that we don't get in academia, or at least in the different universities that I've been affiliated with. The resources that we have are very limited compared to some place like Amazon, Facebook, Google, IBM, Microsoft, not even the big names, big as in, huge companies. So being able to build systems at scale is something that I was very interested in. I've been building towards a certain research theme in my work in general, and I felt like maybe if I go to a place like Amazon or the like, I'd be able to see whether it's feasible or not to get it accomplished. So, so that's from one angle, the reason I went to Amazon or to industry at that juncture in my career. But also the other thing was I wanted to see something where, what does it mean to be in a product environment? So when you're building technology that people could actually consume, as opposed to, we build prototypes in academia, where we look at fancy algorithms and so on, which is lovely work. I mean, it's great, but it looks like, there is a lot more to it when you actually get something to be productivized. And that was also another aspect that I felt was very challenging and very interesting. And they exceeded my expectations on that front in terms of the amount of effort that needs to go into something like that. So we tend to underestimate how much work goes into building a product like Alexa or a product like Lex or machine translation for whatever company. There's a lot that goes into it that's beyond the scientific algorithms that are devised by people like us. So looking and seeing that from being on the inside and seeing that angle was also a very interesting aspect. Now, what's very interesting now in industry, which is different from when I finished my postdoc back in 2005, it was really a closed world. So if you worked for industry, you don't publish very often, and you're kept sort of like under covers. Right now, we have initiatives within Amazon, at least I can speak to that, where we have programs designed especially for scientists. We hire scientists as in scientist roles. And the idea is that people work on cutting-edge research, and they actually publish. So we're encouraged to publish. So there is a very different mindset within within industry right now. And we engage with academia and with other industries. In fact, I'm collaborating with people at Facebook and at Google. We have a joint conference between industrial partners that's called NLP, which is going to happen in September. And it's kind of like an open book on people getting together and from industry who are typically, considered to be competitors, but in fact, there is a notion of openness, and I think it's because of the scientific perception that's adopted by these communities. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. My name is Maria, and I work at Grammarly.
Grammarly,
and I wanted to ask whether you think there's a way to help our colleagues understand better the need for diversity, other than just emphasizing it repeatedly. Because I think everybody thinks that diversity is important, but maybe when people sit down and hack on a problem, which really demonstrates the need for diversity in like language and other cultural aspects, I think people conceptualize it better. So at least in industry, I think people are really excited to take on like a small task and hack on it to understand what are the problems. So do you think there is a list of resources and tasks that demonstrate these problems that everybody could have a workshop, let's say, within a small company so that they really understand the problems and get a different mindset about it?
So that's a good question. Are there you mean like databases or some kind of resources that could be shared and that could be used by? So within companies, and I know that within companies and within even academia, we do have people who are hired into positions that are specifically dedicated to diversity initiatives. And they typically have these resources, and they typically run workshops. The problem is allowing people the time and making people recognize the importance of engaging with these people, these people in those positions. So I've heard it time and time again, people do a lot of lip service to the notion of diversity until they themselves are hit by it, either they get hit by it in somebody discriminating against them or so on and so forth. And I think that's what I meant by being proactive, is that, even if you're not affected yourself today, you could be the next target tomorrow. And I've learned this, and this is part of the message I was trying to get across, is like, be proactive, be engaged, and I mean, it all starts with ourselves. But as I said, I know, for example, within industry and within academia, in the places that I've been in, there have been positions dedicated, so people do recognize the importance of having it. And having centralized resources, I'm not sure about, at least to date, but I do know that in the different places I've been, working in, diversity was a big call, so.
Hi, Mona.
Hey, Nizar.
Nice talk.
Thank you.
So I've worked with Mona for many years, and one of her wonderful qualities is the ability to see the silver lining in every adversity she has, so she can deal with it, tell the story about it, and kind of really make her take that whatever negativity it was, and push her forward. But I actually don't know the answer to this question. This is not a question she asked me to ask.
Okay, you're scaring me.
Are there any regrets in your last 20 years about decisions you made that you can go back and say, oh, I really wish, like cases of failed discovery of silver lining of some sort?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Any regrets? I think I should have put my foot down. Seriously, I mean this. When my parents said I'm not allowed, not they said I'm not allowed to, I should have been more firm about studying math. I really, really, really think that if I had a more solid grounding in mathematics, I would have been even better at what I'm doing. And at the time, my parents were very adamant about math, because in Egypt, you graduate with a degree in math, you go and start becoming something, you don't get any career. There are no career prospects, unfortunately. But I think it was such a fundamental science. I did study a lot of math, obviously, in computer science, but I think if I had been more, stubborn, and I told my mother I'm going to wear the orange socks with the blue dress, and I continued doing that, that's the argument I would have had. I think, not majoring in math or taking math a little bit more seriously, I think that would have been even more helpful. So that's one thing I totally regret.
So I think we have time for one more, if it's quick, and then panel time.
Hi, Mona.
Hi.
So coming from underrepresented countries like Egypt, or I'm from Turkey, how can we look back and now encourage people from those countries to learn more about NLP, or come to US to do PhD? Because, for example, when I was coming to PhD, I didn't know what NLP was. So I just got into Cornell, and then I learned, okay, there is something called NLP. Maybe I can do this.
Well, you lucked out also. Cornell is not too bad a place. But I think we have a role to play. As I said, I think I'm privileged. I was lucky. I came to the right institutions. I studied with with luminaries in our field. I was very, very blessed that way. So my way of giving back, and I've done this time and time again, is I recognize that people in our countries are not able to travel as much, for example. So I've been putting a lot of